President Trump says he will use the U.S. military to close the southern border if Mexico does not stop a caravan of Honduran migrants heading toward the U.S. We will talk live with Mexico's ambassador to Washington in just a moment. First, national correspondent William Lajeunesse tells us the Border Patrol already has its hands full with trying to stop people coming into the country illegally.
While that caravan continues north, U.S. border agents are already overwhelmed, apprehending 4,000 families and children every week. Many dropped off at bus stops like this in Yuma because shelters are full.
This is very typical. Bring them here. They have their tickets. They line up. We make sure they know what's going on. It's 7 days a week at the bus and at the airport as well.
This family crossed into Arizona illegally from Guatemala. 3 days later, a Greyhound bus took them to Texas.
We've been receiving 15 to 20 people a day at the Yuma Refugee Ministry. The large majority are coming from Guatemala.
And agents have nowhere to put them.
We have to basically let them go outside our front door, or we transport them to places where they can get shelter.
The border here is 126 miles long. Most of it features a fence just like this. Now, over the last few months, hundreds of illegal immigrants have come over the fence here and injured themselves, ankles, knees, ribs. Why? This fence is more than 14 feet tall.
They're breaking their legs, hips, ankles, arms, wrists. Just recently, we had a lady jump off the fence holding her 5-month-old daughter, and both of them hit the ground.
Agents say injuries happen daily.
In FY18 alone, we sent approximately 1,500 people to the hospital. Well, that equates to over 9,000 hours of a Border Patrol agent's time in the hospital.
U.S. taxpayers paid the estimated $3 million hospital bill. For agents, Central Americans present a frustrating case of catch and release.
Instead of running and trying for us to chase them and make sure that we don't apprehend them, they run to us.
So the only thing separating this caravan from the U.S. right now is Mexico, which mobilized its federal police today to stop the group from crossing the river along the Guatemala border. And if that fails, President Trump said he will use the U.S. military to close our border with Mexico. Brett?
William, thank you. Let's get some perspective now on this immigration situation tonight from Mexico's ambassador to the U.S., Geronimo Gutierrez. Mr. Ambassador, thanks for coming back.
Thank you very much. It's great to be in your program again, Brett.
You know, the president is obviously livid about all of this. I tweeted among several tweets today, the assault on our country at our southern border, including criminal elements and drugs pouring in, is far more important to me as president than trade or USMCA. Speaking about NAFTA, hopefully Mexico will stop this onslaught at their northern border. All Democrats fall for weak laws. What is Mexico doing tonight to try to stop this caravan?
Brett, just last week we had a conference here in the United States with the Central American countries and the United States. And it was very clear that we need to follow a two-track approach. We need to work in development and help those countries, and we're doing. And we also need to make sure that laws are enforced, and that's also what we're doing. Specifically with respect to the caravan, just today the Mexican government, and this is a very important step, requested the intervention of the UN, the Office of the High Commissioner on Refugees, to help Mexico review any asylum claims from the members of the caravan. That will allow us to have a process by which in our border we will make sure that observing human rights, respecting international law, if there are legitimate claims to refugee, those can be processed in a very clear way.
So if they're seeking asylum, we're talking about immigrants from El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala. They're streaming through Mexico to the U.S. border. If they are, as they claim, seeking asylum, why are they not seeking asylum in your country?
Well, that's precisely the point. Many of them, Mexico also issued a very clear statement saying, if somebody's seeking asylum, Mexico is there, along now with the UN, to look at those claims. We want to make sure that those claims are legitimate.
In other words, before they make the trek across Mexico.
It's not in the interest of anybody to have those people make that trip. They're frequently tricked by human smuggling organizations. We have evidence that this caravan is also very much politically motivated. So we obviously are sensitive to the humanitarian situation that we encounter, and we're we're acting precisely, but we have also made very clear that there is no legal ground on which Mexico can issue a permit by which people can just go through Mexico towards the United States.
Talk about the evidence you just mentioned of being politically motivated.
Well, they're very well organized. It's evident that they're well organized, and we know that sometimes it's often families are tricked by human smuggling organizations into just making the trip. And the first thing that we need to take care of is obviously the security of these people, youngsters and families. And that's why also we're working very close with the United States to fight human trafficking and human smuggling organizations.
The laws here in the U.S., it's different for Central American immigrants as opposed to Mexico. Just the stats are pretty interesting. From 2000, the people coming in along that border, 98% of them were Mexicans. 2017, 60% are Central Americans. This is according to DHS. 2000, most of them were single adults. Now 40% are families or unaccompanied minors. And 95% were repatriated to Mexico within a few hours. Now 99% of these Central American families are staying in the U.S. because of our laws.
There's a very clear change in the profile of migration, as you just mentioned. Mexico has done its job, and people find better opportunities in Mexico, and that's why we have the numbers that you just showed. Now, we have to deal with the fact that an important number of Central Americans are trying to get to the United States from Mexico. That's a reality. And that is why it's so important that the United States and Mexico work together to address development, which we're doing, and also to make sure that there's enforcement of the law. That was the purpose of last week's conference, and I think that the actions that are taken now by the Mexican government are precisely in that sense.
Here is Vice President Pence speaking about this issue to those governments in Central America.
The leaders in this room and the governments that you represent should tell your people, don't put your families at risk by taking the dangerous journey north to attempt to enter the United States illegally. If they can't come to the United States legally, they should not come at all.
So is that happening? Are those Central American governments giving that message? Are they delivering that message so it doesn't start to begin with?
We are increasingly giving that message, and that's very important. That was part of what we discussed last week here in D.C., and we're also working to address the root causes of migration. That's obviously a long-term bet, and we need to do that. As I've said before, Mexico does not promote or advocate for irregular or illegal immigration. What Mexico believes is that it is through cooperation and dialogue with the Central American countries and the United States that we can address this issue. Mexico is in favor of legal, safe, and orderly migration. And the step we just took today, it's extremely important. It's an important precedent. That would allow for a process by which, if anybody seeking asylum, because they're fleeing for a legitimate cause, they in Mexico, they will receive the support of the Mexican government in our own southern border, and there will be, that process will be also sanctioned by the UN.
Some of the administration officials say, listen, this is just built in because now they know what to do. They get to the border, they seek asylum. The U.S. has a process now that you can't turn them away, and there's a long process to assimilate them, actually. To bring them in. Can you say tonight that caravan is not going to make it to the southern border?
To our shared border?
No.
What I can say is three things. Number one, the Mexican government has made it crystal clear that if somebody wants to enter Mexico, it must do so in compliance with our own immigration law. Number two, if you attempt to enter Mexico not through a port of entry, you can be subject to repatriation immediately.
Turned around, back to your
number
country.
three, we are clearly sensitive to the humanitarian situation, and therefore we have taken this step along with the UN, requesting UN involvement to make sure that anybody that is claiming a request of refugee can be processed. In fact, just before coming here, I learned that the first 7 persons have already requested, made a request for refuge in Mexico.
In Mexico?
Yes,
Not in
that's
the U.S. Last thing before I let you go quickly. Just after the negotiations all wrapped up with the new NAFTA, as the president calls it by a different name, Mexico's reaction to this process and where you are?
I think it's a very positive thing for the NAFTA partners, or the United States, Mexico, and Canada. It's certainly a positive thing for Mexico for two reasons, and for our partners. Number one, we have eliminated part of the uncertainty that we had on our trade and investment relations that are important for the three countries. And number two, this allows us to make sure that North America continues to be the most competitive region in the world. And in the present global context, that's important. This is a good result for the three countries.
Mr. Ambassador, we appreciate your time. You're welcome back anytime.
Thank you very much, Red.
A narrow escape tonight.